7 days after we moved into our main salt box, the previous owner called me whispering a warning that shattered my marriage. I'm Annette, 32, a commercial loan officer who knows how to spot a bad investment. And this is how I quietly dismantled the trap my husband and his mother set for me. I grew up in Bangor, the daughter of a woman who spent 40 years sewing hymns at a local dry cleaner. My mother's fingers were constantly pricked and calloused, but she never complained. She taught me that security isn't something someone hands you. It's something you build, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I took that lesson to heart. By the time I was 30, I had worked my way up from a part-time teller to a senior commercial loan officer at the regional bank. I spent my days analyzing balance sheets, sniffing out bad risks, and helping local businesses secure their futures. I knew the value of a hard-earned dollar, and I certainly knew how to spot a liability. But when it came to Julian, I let my guard down. We met at a community charity drive. He was charming, polished, and carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone who had never had to check his bank balance before buying groceries. His mother, Beatrice, was a fixture in the local Heritage Society, which was really just a fancy name for a group of older women who gossiped over expensive tea while wearing costume jewelry they pretended was heirloom gold. From the moment Julian introduced us, Beatrice looked at me like I was a smudge of grease on her fine china. She made passive-aggressive comments about my practical shoes and my sensible haircut, but Julian apologized for her, calling her old-fashioned. And, like a fool, I believed him because I wanted to believe in the family we were building. The house in Weymouth was supposed to be our fresh start. It was a beautiful, weathered salt box built in the late 1800s, sitting on a knoll overlooking the rocky cove where the Atlantic crashed against the main shore. It had wide plank pine floors, a massive stone hearth, and a wraparound porch that smelled of salt air and wild beach roses. The former owner, Clara, was an 84-year-old widow who had lived there for 50 years. When she decided to move into the Weymouth Senior Living Center, she had dozens of offers, many of them from wealthy out-of-state developers who wanted to tear the place down and build modern glass monstrosities. But Clara chose me. I remember the day we signed the papers. Clara sat across from me at the closing table, her hands trembling slightly as she held a tarnished brass keyring with a small, chipped porcelain lighthouse fob. She slid it across the table to me. "This house has a soul, Annette," she had whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It knows when it's loved. I'm giving it to you because I see that same quiet strength in your eyes. Don't let anyone take it from you." What Clara didn't know was that my own husband had already begun chipping away at that strength. Julian had insisted on being on the deed. "We're a team now, Nettie," he had argued, using that smooth, persuasive voice that usually worked on everyone. "It doesn't look right for a husband not to be on the title of his own home. What will my mother say? She already thinks you're keeping me at arm's length because of your frugal background." I had put down 80% of the down payment, every single penny of my savings, the money I had accumulated by skipping vacations, driving a dented sedan, and packing my lunch every single day for a decade. Julian contributed a measly 10%, claiming his capital was tied up in investments. But because I loved him, and because I wanted to silence Beatrice's constant whispers that I didn't trust her son, I relented. I signed the deed with both our names on it. If you've ever sat at a kitchen table with a calculator, realizing that the person sleeping next to you looks at you like an asset to be liquidated rather than a partner to love, then you know the cold that settled in my chest during our first week in that house. I know some of you are doing this exact math at your own kitchen table right now, wondering if the sacrifices you make are being built on a foundation of sand. Stay with me, because the numbers always tell the truth in the end. My Aunt Maeve, retired ICU nurse, who had helped me scrub the grimy floorboards and paint the guest room, had seen right through them. Maeve was a woman who had seen the worst of humanity and still managed to keep her heart open, but she had no patience for nonsense. On our third day of unpacking, while Julian was out taking a business call and Beatrice was inspecting our pantry with a look of supreme disgust, Maeve had pulled me aside in the laundry room. "Annette, listen to me," Maeve had said, her voice low as she wrung out a damp cloth. "That boy of yours has his mother's eyes. They aren't looking at this beautiful old house as a home. They're looking at it like a prize they didn't have to work for. You keep your eyes open, sweetheart. A man who lets his mother dictate how he treats his wife is a man who will sell you out the moment the wind changes. I had laughed it off, telling Maeve she was just being protective. But the seed of doubt had been planted, watering itself every time. Beatrice made a comment about renovating the salt box to match her refined tastes, or every time Julian evaded my questions about when he was going to transfer his share of the moving expenses into our joint account. That brings me to Tuesday. It was our 7th day in the house. A heavy, gray Maine fog had rolled in off the bay, wrapping the salt box in a damp, chilly shroud. The rain pattered softly against the window panes, and the drafty old house smelled of pine, wood, and old memories. Julian and Beatrice had left about an hour earlier. Julian claimed they were going to a specialty hardware store 40 miles away in Portland to look at custom brass fixtures for the master bath I had already told him we couldn't afford. Beatrice had insisted on going with him, claiming my taste was a bit too pedestrian for a house with this much potential. I was sitting at the worn kitchen table, surrounded by half-unpacked boxers of dishes, with a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea in my hands. The brass-gearing Clara had given me sat next to my laptop. I was looking over our bank statements, my stomach nodding as I realized Julian had secretly withdrawn $5,000 from our joint account the day before. The transaction description was blank. Just a cold, hard debit that represented months of my mother's long hours at the dry cleaner and my own late nights at the bank. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID showed Clara's name. I frowned, wondering if she had forgotten some of her belongings in the attic. I swiped the screen and put the phone to my ear. Clara? Hi. Is everything okay? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. When Clara spoke, her voice wasn't the warm, gentle tone I was used to. It was a frantic, trembling whisper. So quiet, I had to press the receiver hard against my ear to make out the words over the sound of the rain beating against the kitchen window. Annette. Oh, thank God you answered, Clara whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of terror and deep shame. Listen to me very carefully. Do not make a sound. Are you alone? Yes, Clara, I'm alone, I said, my heart skipping a beat. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Don't tell Julian. Please, whatever you do, do not tell Julian you are speaking to me, she pleaded, her breathing ragged. Annette. Annette. When I lived in that house, after my husband passed, I got paranoid. I had a security system installed. I never told the real estate agent about all of it. There is one camera. It's disguised as a smoke detector in the high ceiling beam of the living room, facing the fireplace and the hallway. I forgot to unpair it from my old iPad when I moved to the facility. A cold dread began to pool in the pit of my stomach. Clara, I don't understand. I logged onto the app just now to delete my account and clear the storage, Clara whispered, her voice cracking, but the live feed came up automatically. Annette, I just saw your husband and his mother in your living room. They aren't in Portland. They came back. They think you are out running errands. Annette, they are doing something terrible. Something unspeakable to your home, to your life. I am watching them right now. Please, do not call Julian. Do not go into the living room if they are still there. Come to my apartment at the senior center right now. Come alone. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the hard pine floor. The silence of the empty house suddenly feeling like a suffocating weight. My fingers shook so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel of my dented Subaru. The windshield wipers slapped a rhythmic, agonizing beat against the glass, struggling to clear the heavy, gray Maine fog that had rolled in from the Atlantic. The drive to the Weymouth Senior Living Center usually took 15 minutes, but today, with the roads slick and my mind racing, it felt like an eternity. I kept my eyes glued to the yellow lines on the asphalt, my mother's voice echoing in my head. Asterisk when the storm hits. Annette, you don't run. You plant your feet, and you watch where the water flows. Asterisk, I parked in the gravel lot of the Brick Senior facility, the salt air stinging my cheeks as I stepped out into the drizzle. I didn't even bother to grab my umbrella. I just pulled my wool coat tighter around my shoulders, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked through the sliding glass doors. The lobby smelled of lemon polish, stewed peaches, and the quiet, heavy passage of time. Clara was waiting for me in her small, sunlit apartment on the second floor. When she opened the door, her frail hand immediately reached out and pulled me inside, shutting the door behind us with a soft click. She looked smaller than she had at the closing table, her shoulders hunched under a hand-knit lavender shawl. "Oh, Annette," she whispered, her eyes wide and watery. "I am so sorry to be the one to show you this. But you had to know. The house. Your life. They are treating it like a carcass to be picked clean." On her small kitchen table, next to a steaming mug of peppermint tea, sat an older, silver-framed iPad. The screen was lit, displaying a live-stream camera feed from a high-angle perspective. I recognized the hand-hewn pine beams of my own living room instantly. The camera was tucked perfectly out of sight, disguised as a rusted iron bracket near the ceiling. "I bought it after my Arthur passed," Clara said softly, her voice trembling as she pressed her fingers to her lips. "I was an old woman living alone on a dark cove. I needed to feel safe. I forgot the camera was even there. But when I opened the old security app on this tablet today to clear my personal data, there they were." She tapped the screen, rewinding the footage by 20 minutes. "Watch." I leaned in, my hands flat on the cool laminate of Clara's kitchen table. On the screen, my husband, Julian, and his mother, Beatrice, were standing in the center of my living room. They weren't in Portland. They hadn't gone to look at brass fixtures. Beatrice was wearing her expensive beige trench coat, her designer handbag slung over her arm. Julian was holding a heavy crowbar and a blue folder, the exact blue folder where I kept the house's original title documents, which I had stored in the desk drawer in our study. I watched in absolute silence as Julian walked over to the massive stone fireplace. Ich knelt down, tapping the hearthstones until he found a hollow sound. With a brutal practiced leverage, he shoved the crowbar into the seam between the wide pine floorboard and the stone hearth. The wood groaned, a sharp, splintering sound that made my stomach heave. He pried up a section of the floor, exposing a dusty, recessed cavity in the side. From the cavity, Julian pulled out a tarnished metal lockbox. "They found it." Beatrice's voice came through the iPad's small speaker, clear and sharp, cutting through the quiet of Clara's apartment. I knew Arthur kept the original historical deed and the unrecorded easement papers in the house. He never trusted banks. "We have them, Mother," Julian said, his voice stripped of the warm, boyish charm he used on me. It was cold, calculating. "With these easement papers gone, the Historical Preservation Society has no legal standing to stop the demolition. We can tear the saltbox down, subdivide the 3-acre waterfront lot, and build the 3 luxury cottages. And what about your sensible little wife?" Beatrice sneered, her face twisting into a look of pure disdain. "The one who thinks she's so clever because she manages car loans for local fishermen." Julian laughed, a sound that chilled me to my very bones. "Annette did exactly what we needed her to do. She put down 80% of her own cash for the down payment. She insisted on using her clean credit to get the mortgage approved. And yesterday, I had her sign the joint tenancy agreement and the power of attorney for the renovation account under the guise of the plumbing permits. She didn't even read the fine print on the second page. She trusts me." He patted the blue folder. "By next month, I'll transfer her share of the title to my development corporation to pay off my outstanding debts. She'll be legally responsible for the primary mortgage, but she won't own a single square inch of the dirt it sits on. By the time she realizes what happened, the divorce papers will already be served. She'll walk away with nothing but a mountain of debt, and we'll have the land." "Perfect," Beatrice murmured, patting her son's cheek. A girl from her background should have known better than to reach above her station anyway. "Now, put the floorboard back. We need to get to the bank to deposit these papers before she gets home." My breath hitched. The room seemed to spin, the walls closing in on me. I felt a sudden, violent urge to scream, to smash the iPad, to drive back to the house and scream the truth into Julian's lying face. If you have ever felt that blinding, white-hot rush of betrayal, you know how hard it is to keep your mouth shut. You know the urge to tear down the world around you, just to make the pain stop. I know some of you are feeling that heat right now, nursing a wound from someone who swore to cherish you but only wanted to exploit you. But let me tell you something my mother taught me when she was working 12-hour shifts at the dry cleaner, fixing the ruined silk dresses of women who looked right through her. Annette, she'd say, her voice soft but steady as she threaded a needle. Anger is a luxury we can't afford. When people try to cheat you, don't get loud. Get even. The loudest person in the room is always the weakest. The quietest one is the one with the receipt. I took a deep breath, forcing the ice back into my veins. I looked at Clara, who was watching me with tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Clara, I said, my voice incredibly calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Can you email this video file to me? Right now. Of course, dear, Clara said, her fingers trembling as she tapped the screen. I'll send the whole recording. Every single minute of it. Thank you, I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out my yellow legal pad, the one I used at the bank to draft commercial loan term sheets. I wrote down my personal secured email address. Send it there. And Clara, please, do not delete the app. Keep the live feed running. If they come back, I need to know. I will, she promised, squeezing my hand. Don't let them take my home, Annette. Don't let them ruin you. They won't, I said. I promise you, Clara, they won't. I walked out of the senior center and sat in my car, the rain still drumming on the roof. I didn't cry. There was no time for tears. Instead, I opened my laptop, tethered it to my phone's hotspot, and waited for the email from Clara. When the notification popped up, I downloaded the video, saving 3 copies, one to my hard drive, one to a secure cloud folder, and one to an encrypted thumb drive I kept on my key. Then, I went to work. As a commercial loan officer, I knew that every financial scam leaves a paper trail. Julian thought he was a financial genius, but he was sloppy. He was arrogant. And arrogant men always make mistakes because they assume the women around them aren't paying attention. First, I logged into my bank's internal portal using my secure employee credentials. I pulled up our joint account. There it was, the $5,000 withdrawal from yesterday. I traced the routing number. It hadn't gone to a hardware store. It had been transferred to an escrow account, registered to a local notary public named Marcus Vansaman. I knew from my professional circles as a shady operator who had been investigated twice for fraudulent title transfers. Julian had paid him to notarize the forged power of attorney. Next, I pulled up the county registry of deeds. My heart stopped for a fraction of a second. Julian hadn't filed the quitclaim deed yet, but he had scheduled an appointment with the county clerk for Friday morning, just 3 days from now. He was waiting for the escrow on his development corporation's debt restructure to close before he officially stripped my name from the title. He was playing a high-stakes game of financial chess, but he didn't realize I had been studying the board before he even knew how to move the pawns. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Maeve, I said when my aunt answered. I need you. Meet me at the Seastar Diner in 10 minutes. Bring your reading glasses, and don't tell a soul where you're going. I'm already on my way, sweetheart, Maeve said, her voice instantly dropping into that calm, emergency room tone she used when a trauma patient came through the doors. I'll be there. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a vinyl booth at the back of the local diner, the smell of fried clams and cheap coffee hanging heavy in the air. Maeve slid into the booth across from me, her face pale with concern. I didn't say a word. I just slid my laptop across the table and hit play on the video. Mavi watched, her hand slowly rising to cover her mouth. I watched her eyes widen, then narrow into a look of absolute maternal fury. When the video finished, she looked up at me, her eyes flashing. That miserable, parasitic little coward, Maeve hissed, her voice vibrating with rage. And that mother of his? I'd like to take my scrub brush to both of their faces. Annette, we are going to the police. We are stopping this right now. No, I said, reaching across the table to lay my hand over hers. My grip was firm. Cold, if we go to the police now, Julian will hire a high-priced lounger. Beatrice will use her connections to tie this up in family court for years. They'll claim the video was an invasion of privacy, or that Julian was just joking, or that the power of attorney was signed legally. I'll be dragged through a public scandal. My job at the bank will be compromised, and I'll be tied to him financially for the rest of my life. Maeve frowned, looking at me closely. Then, what are we going to do? I opened my yellow legal pad, revealing a detailed step-by-step list of financial transactions, account numbers, and legal statutes. We are going to let them think they are winning, I whispered, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. We are going to let Julian file those papers. And then, we are going to use his own greed to pull the rug out from under him so fast he won't even know he's falling until he hits the concrete. I tapped the yellow paper, showing Maeve the trap I had spent the last hour designing. When I drove back to the salt box that afternoon, the fog had settled so thick over the cove that the spruce trees looked like gray ghosts rising from the rocks. I parked my Subaru in the gravel driveway, right next to Julian's pristine, leased SUV. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my chest felt like it was filled with broken glass. I sat there for a full minute, looking at the warm yellow lights spilling from the living room windows. It looked so cozy, so safe, so safe. It was the kind of picture-perfect home you see on a postcard, the kind of home I thought I had finally earned. But now, I knew the truth. That light was a mirage, and the man inside was a predator waiting for the right moment to spring his trap. I reached into my bag and touched the cool, smooth surface of the encrypted thumb drive on my keychain. It was my shield! I took a deep, shuddering breath, opened the car door, and stepped out into the damp Maine air. As I walked up the porch steps, the front door swung open. Julian stood there, wearing his favorite cashmere sweater, the one I had bought him for his birthday, and a warm, boyish smile that made my stomach turn. "Nettie, you're back," he said, stepping forward to wrap his arms around me. "We were getting worried about you. The weather is getting nasty out there. If you have ever had to hug a person who you know is actively planning to ruin your life, you know the absolute horror of that moment. You have to force your muscles to relax. You have to let them press against you, smelling their familiar cologne, while every instinct in your body is screaming at you to run or to strike." I let him kiss my cheek. I even managed a small, tired smile. "The traffic was awful near the bridge," I said, my voice remarkably even, "and my phone battery died. I'm sorry I didn't call." "Oh, sweetheart, it's fine." Beatrice's voice drifted from the kitchen, dripping with that sugary, condescending tone she always used when she wanted to play the gracious matriarch. "We just got back ourselves. Portland was a total bust. The hardware store didn't have a single thing that would suit this lovely old house. Honestly, the selection was so ordinary." I walked into the kitchen, keeping my eyes down so they wouldn't see the cold fury burning in them. On the counter sat a cracked ceramic mixing bowl with blue piece my mother had given me when I got my first apartment. It was chipped at the rim, worn from decades of mixing pancake batter and sundae biscuits, but it was sturdy. It had survived. I pulled it toward me, using it as a physical anchor to keep my hands from shaking. "That's a shame," I said, reaching into the pantry for a box of pasta. "I thought you'd find exactly what you were looking for." "Well, we'll just have to look elsewhere," Julian said, leaning against the doorframe, his eyes tracking my movements. He looked so relaxed, so completely confident that he had me fooled. "Actually, Nettie, speaking of the house, I was talking to the contractor today. He says we need to get those permits finalized by Friday. Did you have a chance to look over those papers I left on your desk yesterday?" He was talking about the power of attorney, the document he had slipped into the stack of plumbing permits, hoping my exhaustion and trust would keep me from reading the second page. "I did," I said, keeping my voice light as I filled a pot with water. "I signed them this morning before I went out. There, on the desk." I saw the briefest flash of triumph in Julian's eyes. It was gone in a millisecond, replaced by his usual easygoing grin, but I caught it. I felt a sick twist in my gut, but also a strange, hard sense of clarity. He thought he had won. He thought he had just secured his inheritance. "Awesome," he said, stepping over to squeeze my shoulder. "You're the best, Nettie. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without your organizational skills." "You'd probably be lost," I murmured. staring at the bubbles starting to form at the bottom of the pot. Asterisk yes. Asterisk, I thought. Asterisk, you would be completely, utterly lost. And you're about to find out just how lost you can get. Asterisk. That night, after Julian and Beatrice had retired to their respective rooms, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The house was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic creaking of the old timber frame against the coastal wind. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I only used the soft glow of a small desk lamp. I know some of you are looking at your own lives right now, realizing that the people you trusted most are the ones holding the scissors, waiting to cut the safety net from under you. You might be feeling that cold, paralyzing fear that tells you to just accept it, to let them take what they want because fighting back is too hard, too painful. But I need you to hear me. The pain of standing up for yourself is nothing compared to the slow, suffocating death of letting someone erase you. I opened my secure banking portal. As a senior commercial loan officer, I didn't just have access to basic account balances. I had the training to perform deep forensic audits. I spent the next 3 hours dissecting Julian's financial life. Like a surgeon, what I found was even worse than I had imagined. Julian's development company, Oak and Anchor Holdings, was a hollow shell. He had taken out 3 massive high-interest bridge loans to fund a condominium project in Rockland that had fallen through months ago. He was personally liable for over $400,000 in delinquent debt, and his creditors were preparing to file a petition for involuntary bankruptcy against him. He didn't just want to build 3 luxury cottages on my land. He, needed too. The salt box was his escape hatch. If he could strip my name from the title, transfer the property to his corporation, and subdivide the waterfront lot, he could secure a new line of credit to pay off his immediate debts and keep himself out of court. And the $5,000 he had stolen from our joint account? It wasn't just for the notary, Marcus Vance. I traced the transaction history and found that the funds had been routed through Vance's escrow account directly to a private title insurance company. Julian was purchasing a single-interest title policy that would protect his development corporation from any future claims, specifically any claims made by me, after the divorce. He had planned every single detail. He had calculated the cost of my destruction down to the penny, but he had made one fatal assumption. He assumed I was just a sensible girl who didn't understand the machinery of the system. On Wednesday morning, my execution began. I didn't go to my branch office. Instead, I drove to the county courthouse in Alfred, the windshield wipers of my Subaru, fighting a losing battle against the persistent Maine drizzle. I walked into the registry of deeds, the smell of old paper and floor wax instantly calming my nerves. I met with the county registrar, a sharp no-nonsense woman named Evelyn, who had known my mother for 30 years. I didn't tell her about the betrayal. I didn't need to. I kept it strictly professional. Evelyn, I need to file a formal revocation of power of attorney, I said, sliding a notarized document across the counter. I had drafted it myself the night before, using the bank's legal templates, and had it notarized by a trusted colleague at a different branch first thing this morning. It needs to be recorded immediately against my name and the parcel number for the Weymouth salt box. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, looking at the document. This will nullify any action taken under any prior power of attorney effective immediately. Annette, are you sure? I'm positive, I said. And I also need to file a lis. Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. A lis pendens is a formal, public notice that a property's title is subject to an active legal dispute. Once filed, it acts like a giant, glowing red stop sign on the property's title. No bank will issue a loan against it. No title company will insure it, and no buyer will touch it. It effectively freezes the property in place. A lis pendens requires an active lawsuit, dear, Evelyn said softly. I know, I replied, sliding a second folder across the desk. Inside was a copy of the civil complaint I had drafted with my attorney that morning, a lawsuit against Julian for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of marital funds. It was filed in the civil court upstairs 10 minutes ago. Here is the docket number. Evelyn looked at me for a long, silent moment. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded, her face softening with a look of quiet solidarity. Consider it done, Annette. I'll have both documents recorded and indexed before noon. Thank you, Evelyn, I said. That was step one. The legal shield was in place. The moment Julian walked into the registry on Friday morning to file his fraudulent quitclaim deed, he would find that his power of attorney was worthless and that the property was legally locked down by an active fraud lawsuit. But I wasn't done. A shield only protects you. A sword is what wins the battle. Step 2 took me to the Weymouth Historical Society, located in a small, shingled cottage near the town harbor. The air inside smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender. I was there to meet Vivian, a local archivist who had spent her entire life protecting the town's maritime history. Annette, it's so good to see you, Vivian said, rising from behind a desk piled high with leather-bound ledgers. Clara told me you bought the old salt box. We were so relieved. We were terrified some developer would get their hands on it. They tried, I said, sitting down across from her. Vivian, I need to ask you about the property's history. Clara mentioned an unrecorded easement that protects the cove from development. Do you know anything about it? Vivian's eyes lit up. Oh, yes, the Arthur Weymouth easement of 1922. Arthur's grandfather set it up to ensure the public would always have access to the clam flats, and that no structures could ever be built within 200 feet of the high water mark. It's a perpetual conservation easement. But, Julian, my husband, found the original document in the house and took it, I said, my voice dropping. He thinks because the original is gone, the easement doesn't exist. Vivian let out a soft, dry laugh that sounded like rustling paper. Your husband might know a lot about modern real estate, Annette, but he doesn't know a thing about Maine history. Arthur Weymouth was a meticulous man. He didn't just keep the original deed in his hearth. He had a certified copy recorded in the York County Commissioner's Ledger of 1924, which we have digitized right here. She turned her computer screen toward me, displaying a beautifully preserved, handwritten document from a century ago. This easement is fully active, legally binding, and runs with the land forever, Vivian said, her voice firm. Even if someone tore the house down, they could never build so much as a tool shed on that waterfront. Any attempt to do so would result in an automatic injunction from the state. I looked at the screen, a wave of profound relief washing over me. Julian's entire development plan, 3 luxury cottages that were supposed to save him from bankruptcy, was a legal impossibility. He had committed fraud, destroyed my home's historic floorboards, and ruined his marriage for a piece of land he could never, ever develop. Vivian, I said, a cold, quiet triumph settling deep into my bones. Can you print me a certified copy of this ledger? And can you email a digital copy to the Weymouth Planning Board? With pleasure, Vivian smiled. I left the Historical Society and walked back out into the rain, the heavy gray clouds finally starting to break over the Atlantic, letting a thin sliver of pale afternoon light pierce through the fog. The trap was set, the legal documents were filed, the bank accounts were monitored, and the evidence of Julian's fraud was safely secured. Now, all I had to do was wait for Friday morning. I had to go back to that house, sit at that table, and pretend to be the quiet, obedient wife for 48 more hours. I had to let Julian believe he was the clever one, while the floor beneath his feet was already beginning to give way. The rain had finally stopped by Friday morning, leaving the coastal air thick with the scent of wet pine needles, cold mud, and salt. Dawn broke over the cove in a thin, watery streak of silver, casting long, pale shadows across the wide plank floors of the salt box. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the tide slowly pull back from the gray rocks of the beach. In my hands, I held my mother's blue-striped mixing bowl, running my thumb over the small chip on the rim. My mother used to say that a crack doesn't make a vessel useless. It just shows where it had to bend to hold what was put inside. For 2 years, I had bent myself into shapes that didn't fit me. Trying to be the wife Julian wanted, trying to be the daughter-in-law Beatrice wouldn't look down on. But standing in that quiet kitchen, the cold clay of the bowl solid against my palms, I knew the bending was over. By 9 o'clock, the stage was set. Julian was in a buoyant mood, humming a little tune as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and a crisp white shirt, looking every bit the successful developer he pretended to be. Beatrice sat at the kitchen table, her fingers draped in heavy, costume gold rings that clinked against her teacup. She was wearing her favorite beige silk scarf, her posture rigid and triumphant. "It's a beautiful morning to secure our future, isn't it, Annette?" Julian said, flashing me that dazzling, boyish smile. "The contractor is ready to break ground on the plumbing lines next week. We just need to get these final permits signed and notarized." "It certainly is a morning for securing things," I replied, my voice light, almost pleasant. Right on cue, the gravel in the driveway crunched. I looked out the window to see a sleek, black sedan pull up. Out stepped Marcus Vance, the notary Julian had paid $5,000 of my hard-earned money to buy. He was a small, ferret-like man with a receding hairline and a cheap wool coat that looked too large for his frame. He carried a heavy, black leather briefcase. A moment later, another car pulled in behind him. It was Maeve's battered green station wagon. She stepped out, wearing her heavy yellow slicker and carrying a thermos of coffee. She didn't look at Vance. She just marched up the porch steps, her face set in a hard, protective line. When the front door opened, Julian frowned slightly at the sight of my aunt. "Maeve, what are you doing here? I thought you were working the day shift at the clinic." "My shift was covered, Julian," Maeve said, stepping into the kitchen and setting her thermos down on the counter next to my mother's mixing bowl. She walked over to my side, her hand resting firmly on my shoulder. "I wanted to be here to support my niece. She's had a big week." Beatrice sniffed, adjusting her scarf. "Well, I suppose it's nice for Annette to have some family support, even if this is strictly a business matter. Let's get on with it, shall we? Mr. Vance is a very busy man." Marcus Vance sat at the worn kitchen table, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of legal documents. He didn't look me in the eye. He kept his gaze focused on his gold-plated fountain pen, his fingers twitching slightly. "All right, Mrs. Vance, excuse me." "Mrs. Miller," Vance stammered, sliding the papers toward me. "These are the final transfer covenants and the corporate authorization forms for Oak and Anchor Holdings. We just need your signature on page 4, and then I'll notarize the execution." Julian handed me a heavy, silver pen. "Go ahead, Nettie. Just sign, right there on the line. Once this is done, the weight will be off your shoulders. We can finally start building." I looked down at the paper. I looked at the line where my name was printed. Under net, in tiny, gray print, were the words, "Grantor hereby relinquishes all rights, title, and interest in the real property described as Parcel 402, including all structures and shoreline rights, to Oak and Anchor Holdings, LLC. I know some of you have sat at a table like this. You've felt that crushing pressure, that soft whispering voice in your head telling you to just sign, to just let them have it because fighting back is too terrifying. You're afraid of the anger, the screaming, the ugly labels they'll throw at you. But let me tell you something. The moment you refuse to be their victim, their power vanishes like fog in the morning sun. I didn't take the pen. Instead, I set it down on the table, right in the center of the documents. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my laptop, placing it on the table and opening the lid. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice incredibly calm, "I think we should watch a short movie. I think you'll find the cinematography quite interesting." Julian laughed, a nervous, defensive sound. "Nettie, what are you talking about? We don't have time for games. Mr. Vance has other appointments." "This won't take long, Julian," I said. I clicked the mouse. The screen lit up, displaying the high-angle video Clara had sent me. The audio came through the laptop's speakers, clear and sharp in the quiet kitchen. There was the sound of a crowbar splintering wood. There was Julian kneeling by the hearth, prying up the wide pine floorboards of my living room. There was Beatrice, her face twisted in a sneer, calling me a sensible little wife who manages car loans for local fishermen. And there was Julian, boasting about how he had stolen $5,000 from our joint account to pay Marcus Vance, and how he was going to leave me with nothing but a mountain of debt. The kitchen went dead silent, save for the sound of the rain starting to tap against the window panes again. Julian's face drained of color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Beatrice froze, her hands suspended in midair, her expensive gold rings suddenly looking cheap and gaudy against her pale skin. Marcus Vance looked like he wanted to melt through the floorboards. His eyes darted frantically from the laptop screen to me, his hands shaking so hard he dropped his gold pen onto the table. Where did you get that? Julian whispered, his voice cracking, the boyish charm completely shattered. Annette, that's an invasion of privacy. That's illegal. You can't use that. Actually, Julian, I can, I said, leaning back in my chair. The camera was installed by the previous owner, Clara, who still holds the active security contract for the system. She authorized the recording, and she happily shared it with me. Annette, listen to me, Julian stammered, reaching across the table to grab my hand. It's not what it looks like. We were just joking. It was a joke, Nettie. You know how my mother gets. We were just talking about worst-case scenarios. Don't touch her, Maeve barked, her voice like a whip cracking in the small room. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing with 30 years of emergency room authority. You stay right where you are, you miserable little thief. Beatrice finally found her voice, her face flushing a deep, angry red. How dare you? How dare you bring this trashy, fabricated nonsense into our home? Julian, call the police. She's harassing us. Go ahead, Julian. Call them, I said, sliding a second folder across the table, right over his precious corporate documents. But before you do, you might want to look at these. Julian slowly opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page, and I watched his shoulders sink as he read the title, Asterisk Revocation of Power of Attorney. Asterisk. I filed that on Wednesday morning. Julian, I said, my voice steady and measured. Any power of attorney you think you had to sign my name or transfer this property was legally nullified 48 hours ago. The document you have in front of you is completely worthless. Julian flipped to the next page. His breath hitched. A lis pendens. Yes, I replied. A lis pendens is currently recorded against the title of this house. It means the property is subject to an active civil lawsuit for fraud, conversion of marital funds, and breach of fiduciary duty. You cannot sell this house. You cannot transfer it. You cannot borrow against it. And no title company in the state of Maine will touch it until that lawsuit is resolved. Your little development deal with Oak and Anchor is dead in the water. Annette, you can't do this, Beatrice shrieked, slamming her teacup down so hard it shattered against the table, spilling lukewarm tea across the clean pine wood. We have investors. We have obligations. You're going to ruin my son. Your son ruined himself, Beatrice, I said, looking her dead in the eye. He spent months trying to steal a home that my mother worked her fingers to the bone to help me buy. He tried to turn me into a financial ghost. But you see, I understand numbers. And I understand the law. I turned my gaze to Marcus Vance. The notary was already packing his papers back into his briefcase, his face sweating profusely. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, professional register. I suggest you leave, now. Because, if you don't, the next person you'll be showing those documents to is the State Notary Commission and the District Attorney. I have the bank routing numbers showing the $5,000 bribe Julian paid you from our joint account. That makes you an active co-conspirator in grand larceny and real estate fraud. Vance didn't say a single word. He snapped his briefcase shut, stood up so fast his chair scraped violently against the floor, and practically ran out the back door, leaving Julian and Beatrice sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. Julian stared at the empty doorway, then slowly turned his head back to me. The arrogance was gone. The polished exterior was completely stripped away, leaving nothing but a desperate, broke man who had finally run out of moves. Annette, please, he pleaded, his voice trembling as he reached out to me. We can talk about this. We can fix this. I love you, Nettie. I only did this because I was in over my head. The debts, they were suffocating me. Please, don't do this to us. I looked at him, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel any fear. I didn't feel any guilt. I only felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stand on your own 2 feet and realize the ground beneath you is solid rock. The only thing we are going to discuss, Julian, is the terms of our divorce, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet kitchen. The silence that followed the slamming of our heavy front door was the loudest sound I had ever heard in that house. For several minutes, neither Maeve nor I moved. We just stood there in the kitchen, the steam from the kettle rising quietly into the cool morning air, the pale main light catching the dust motes dancing over the papers scattered across the worn table. The storm had passed through the room, leaving a strange, clean emptiness in its wake. Maeve was the first to break the quiet. She walked over to the stove, turned off the burner, and poured 2 cups of black tea into the thick ceramic mugs we'd unpacked just days before. She didn't offer any platitudes. She didn't tell me everything was going to be all right, because she knew as well as I did that the hardest part of any storm isn't the wind, it's the clearing of the debris. She simply slid a mug toward me, her hand resting briefly on my wrist. Her grip was warm, solid, and smelled faintly of lavender soap. "You did good, Annette," she said softly, her voice carrying the steady weight of a woman who had held the hands of patients taking their last breaths. "Your mother would have been so proud of the way you stood your ground today." I looked down at my mother's blue-striped mixing bowl sitting on the counter. It looked small, chipped, and entirely out of place in a house that Julian and Beatrice had wanted to turn into a luxury showcase. Yet, it was the sturdiest thing in the room. I picked up my mug, the warmth of the ceramic seeping into my cold fingers, and took a slow, deep breath. "I have to finish it, maybe," I whispered. "I can't let him have even a crack to crawl back through." Over the next 3 months, my life became a study in clinical, legal precision. If you've ever had to untangle your life from someone who treated your love as a transaction, you know that the courtroom is where the real poetry of survival is written. It isn't written in grand speeches. It's written in the dry, boring language of legal briefs, affidavits, and financial ledgers. Because of my background as a commercial loan officer, I didn't hire a flashy, high-priced divorce attorney who would turn my pain into a public spectacle. Instead, I hired Sarah, a sharp, quiet family law attorney from Bangor who specialized in asset protection. We sat in her small office overlooking the Penobscot River, surrounded by cardboard boxes of financial records, and systematically dismantled Julian's defense before he could even mount one. The notary, Marcus Vance, had flipped within 48 hours of our kitchen confrontation. Desperate to save his state commission and avoid criminal charges for notary fraud, he provided Sarah with a signed, sworn affidavit detailing exactly how Julian had paid him $5,000 from our joint account to notarize the forged power of attorney. That affidavit was our hammer. When Julian's attorney tried to argue that the power of attorney was signed under mutual understanding and that Julian was merely acting in the best interest of the marital estate, Sarah simply slid Vance's affidavit across the table, along with a copy of the high-definition video Clara had captured from the living room beam. I watched Julian's lawyer lean back in his chair, take off his glasses, and rub his temples. He looked at his client, then at us. "We need to discuss settlement terms," he muttered. "We didn't show any mercy, but we didn't show any malice either. I didn't want to ruin Julian. I just wanted my freedom and my home." I offered him a simple, non-negotiable choice. He could sign a quitclaim deed, surrendering his 10% interest in the Weymouth Saltbox to me for $0, return the $5,000 he had embezzled from our joint account, and agreed to a quiet, uncontested divorce with no spousal support. In exchange, I would agree not to press criminal charges for fraud and grand larceny, and I would keep the video of his heartside confession out of the public record. Julian had no other options. His development company, Oak and Anchor Holdings, collapsed into involuntary bankruptcy 3 weeks later. His creditors descended like gulls on a fishing boat, stripping away his leased SUV, his office space in Portland, and the remainder of his personal credit lines. If he had gone to trial with me, the criminal exposure would have landed him in federal prison. On a rainy Tuesday in late November, Julian signed the quitclaim deed. His hand shook so badly, the pen slipped twice, leaving small, dark ink smudges on the clean white paper. He didn't look at me once. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life playing with house money, only to realize the house always wins in the end. Beatrice didn't fare much better. The Weymouth Historical Society, led B, officially recorded the digital copy of the 1922 Arthur Weymouth easement, permanently protecting the 3-acre waterfront lot from any future subdivision or commercial development. When the local Heritage Society found out that Beatrice's son had tried to illegally bypass a historical conservation easement and that her family's supposed wealth was nothing but a mountain of delinquent corporate, that she was quietly but firmly asked to resign her seat. The costume gold rings and the expensive tea parties couldn't hide the truth anymore. I know some of you are listening to this right now, sitting at your own kitchen tables, looking at the cracks in your own lives, and wondering if you have the strength to make that same stand. You might be feeling the weight of the years you gave to someone who didn't deserve them, feeling like it's too late to start over. But let me tell you something, it is never too late to reclaim your name. The ground beneath your feet might feel shaky right now, but the moment you decide to stop carrying the people who are trying to pull you down, you'll realize just how light you really are. Stay with me, because the peace at the end of the road is worth every single step. Once the legal papers were finalized and the deed was officially recorded solely in my name, I went to work on the salt box. I didn't hire a crew of expensive contractors to modernize the place. I wanted to preserve its soul, just as Clara had asked me to. I hired a local carpenter named Thomas, a quiet older man who wore flannel shirts and smelled of cedar shavings. Together, we knelt by the massive stone hearth in the living room. Thomas carefully repaired the wide pine floorboards Julian had splintered with his crowbar, using reclaimed timber from an old barn down the road. He fitted the boards together with wooden dowels and hand-rubbed them with beeswax, leaving a faint, dark seam where the wood had been broken. "It's got a scar now, Annette," Thomas said, wiping his brow with a dusty handkerchief. "But a scar just means the wood survived the break. It's stronger right there than it ever was before." "I know, Thomas," I said, running my fingers over the smooth, warm pine. "I think that's exactly how it's supposed to be." To celebrate the completion of the repairs, I invited Clara over for tea. She arrived on a crisp, clear December afternoon, her hand-knit lavender shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her eyes bright as she looked at the restored hearth. I had framed the certified copy of the 1922 historical easement and hung it on the wall right above the mantel, a permanent shield protecting the cove we both loved. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking chamomile tea from my mother's blue-striped mugs. The salt air drifted in through the slightly open window, mixing with the sweet smell of the wood smoke from the hearth. "You kept your promise, Annette," Clara whispered, her frail fingers reaching out to squeeze my hand. "You saved the house, and you saved yourself." "We saved it together, Clara," I said. "If you hadn't called me that day, if you hadn't had the courage to speak up, I don't know where I'd be." "You would have figured it out, dear," Clara smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Quiet strength doesn't wait for someone to save it, it just waits for the right moment to show itself." A year after the divorce was finalized, I was walking down Congress Street in Portland on my way to a regional banking conference. The autumn wind was brisk, blowing dry orange leaves across the brick sidewalks. As I passed a small, local logistics office, the door opened, and a man stepped out carrying a stack of cardboard shipping boxes. It was Julian. He wasn't wearing his cashmere sweaters or his navy blazers anymore. He was dressed in a simple, gray company polo shirt and worn work pants. His hair was slightly long, and there were deep, tired lines etched around his eyes. He looked like an ordinary man working an ordinary job, trying to make ends meet in a world that didn't owe him any favors. He saw me, and he froze. For a second, I felt a familiar, instinctual tightening in my chest, the old fear trying to raise its head. But then, as I looked at him, the fear simply dissolved, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of pity. He didn't look like the prince I had married, but he didn't look like the monster from the camera feed either. He was just a man who had tried to build a life on a foundation of sand, and now had to learn how to stand on the dirt. I stopped. I didn't run. I didn't gloat. I just gave him a small, polite nod, a nod of recognition, of acknowledgement, and of finality. Julian looked at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded back. He adjusted the boxers in his arms, turned, and walked down the street toward a waiting delivery van. There were no words spoken. There was no dramatic confrontation. We were just two people who had once shared a bed, now moving in completely opposite directions. I watched him go until he disappeared around the corner, and then I turned and walked toward my conference. My feet felt light on the brick path. The air smelled of salt and wood smoke, and the sky above the harbor was a brilliant, endless blue. I still live in the Saltbox on the Cove. Sometimes, on quiet winter nights, when the wind is howling off the Atlantic and the old timber frame creaks in the dark, I sit by the stone hearth with a wool blanket pulled over my lap. I look at the seam in the pine floor, the beautiful, sturdy scar that tells the story of how my home was almost lost and how it was saved. I've learned that life doesn't always give you the happy endings you see in the movies. Sometimes, the victory is quiet. Sometimes, the victory is simply being able to sit at your own table, drinking tea from a chipped blue-striped bowl, knowing that every single thing in your home belongs to you, and that no one can ever take it away. Because in the end, love isn't a transaction. It isn't a business plan, a joint tenancy agreement, or a line item in a development budget. Love is a gift you give to those who have earned the right to stand by your fire, and the greatest strength of all is knowing when to close the door and keep the warmth for yourself.